I was 10 years old the day my parents sold me for the price of 3 bottles of cheap wine, and I was 10 years old the day the Orcs killed everyone who bought me. I don't remember which of those two facts I was more grateful for at the time. I remember only that both of them happened within the same terrible month, and that I survived one disaster only to be handed directly into the jaws of the next. My name is Kale. I don't carry a family name because the people who gave me my first one didn't consider me worth attaching their own to permanently. My father drank. My mother drank alongside him, mostly to tolerate his company. And between them, they produced exactly one useful commodity in their otherwise unremarkable lives: a son healthy enough to carry loads on his back once he grew old enough to walk steadily. I was sold to a merchant caravan as a porter cheap labor, the specific kind of arrangement that border villages arranged quietly with traveling trade companies who needed extra hands and weren't particular about how those hands became available. I carried water skins and grain sacks and whatever else the caravan's actual paying customers didn't want to carry themselves, sleeping under the wagons, eating whatever scraps the caravan master decided a porter's labor was worth. I don't remember feeling especially wronged by this arrangement at the time. Children absorb their circumstances as simply how the world works, before they've accumulated enough comparison to recognize cruelty as anything other than ordinary weather. The Orcs found the caravan on the 11th day of a journey toward the Easter trade roads, in a valley pass that the caravan master apparently believed was safer than it actually was. I was fetching water from a stream slightly separated from the main camp when the screaming started. I remember the specific sound of it, not the organized panic of people responding to expected danger, but the raw, immediate horror of people encountering violence they had genuinely never prepared themselves to survive. By the time I made my way back toward the camp, crouched low and hidden in brush that instinct rather than strategy suggested might keep me alive a few minutes longer, the fighting was already ending. Orcs women, all of them, moving with the specific brutal efficiency of warriors who'd done this many times before, worked through the caravan's remaining defenders with a particular economy of violence that comes from genuine mastery rather than simple savage rage. I didn't understand, watching from that brush, that I was witnessing something the human kingdoms call raiding, and the Orcs themselves call something closer to harvest resources taken from those who had more than they needed, delivered to those who had considerably less. I understood only that everyone I traveled with for 11 days was dying, and that I was very likely about to join them. One of the Orcs found me anyway. I'd stayed hidden longer than apparently anyone expected a 10-year-old human child to manage, but eventually hunger and thirst and simple exhaustion drove me from the brush toward whatever fate the camp's aftermath actually held. She was tall. Orcs generally are, by human standards, though I didn't have sufficient comparison at the time to properly calibrate exactly how tall. Scarred along one side of her face in a pattern that suggested old, healed injury rather than recent battle. She held a blade still wet with the caravan's final defender's blood, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately categorize, crouched in the ruins of a camp that no longer contained anyone who might claim me. I didn't run. I don't fully know why, even now, considering it across the years, since perhaps simple exhaustion, perhaps some instinct that running would only delay an ending that felt, in that specific moment, entirely inevitable regardless of what I actually did. She studied me for a long moment. Then she did something that I would spend years afterward trying to properly understand. She lowered her blade. Small, she said, her common tongue accented but functional, the specific practical bilingualism that Orc raiders apparently maintain for exactly this kind of encounter with human settlements. Alone? They're all dead, I said, my voice carrying the specific flat shock of someone reporting facts too large to properly process emotionally. The caravan. Everyone. I know. I killed most of them. She said this without particular pride or shame, simply stating fact the way someone might mention weather. You. Not caravan guard. Not merchant. What? Porteur. Slave, I suppose, though nobody ever used that specific word. Something shifted in her expression at this, not sympathy exactly. Something closer to recognition, the specific weight of someone encountering a category of suffering that apparently registered as familiar despite our considerable cultural distance. She was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an intensity that made me acutely aware of how completely my continued existence depended on whatever calculation she was currently working through. Name, she said finally. Kale. Kale. She tested the syllable, then made a decision I still don't fully understand the complete reasoning behind. Even now, I am Vrenna. You come with us. I didn't understand, in that moment, that I was being offered rescue rather than simply postponed execution. I processed her words with the specific confused terror of someone uncertain whether come with us meant immediate death by different method or something genuinely, impossibly different. It was, as it turned out across the following years, considerably different. Vrenna's warband, I would learn, over subsequent days, that they called themselves the Ash Wolf Sisterhood, a traveling company of orc women who'd chosen a life of perpetual wandering and battle-seeking rather than the more settled existence that broader Draken Orc society generally maintained didn't fully welcome my presence with any particular warmth. I was, after all, exactly the kind of creature their raids typically existed to plunder rather than protect. The Warband's leader, an older orc woman named Gara, whose bearing carried the specific, unmistakable weight of genuine authority even before anyone explained her position to me, examined me the following morning with an expression that made clear my continued survival remained genuinely uncertain regardless of Vrenna's personal decision to spare me during the raid itself. A human child, Gara said, addressing Vrenna directly while I stood nearby, deliberately not looking away despite considerable, mounting fear. Explain. Found him hiding. Alone. Slave to the caravan we took. Vrenna's voice carried specific, careful respect toward her leader, though nothing in her bearing suggested she was prepared to simply abandon whatever decision she'd already made. Killing him accomplishes nothing. He's no threat. He's human, Gara said, the specific weight of that single word carrying considerable, complicated history I wouldn't fully understand for years afterward. Generations of conflict between orc and human kingdoms. The particular brutal cycle of raid and retaliation that had apparently defined relations between our peoples for longer than either side could clearly remember the actual original cause. He's a child, Vrenna countered, sold by his own people for the price of drink. If we kill him for being human, we're no better than whatever human hunters would kill our own children for being orcs. The specific logic of this argument settled over the assembled war band with visible weight, several of the gathered women exchanging glances that suggested genuine consideration rather than simple dismissal. Gara studied me for a long, silent moment, the specific calculating attention of someone weighing considerable implications beyond simple, immediate mercy or cruelty. He will not be soft, she said, finally, her tone carrying specific, unmistakable warning directed as much toward Vrenna as toward me. If he stays, he trains. He fights. He becomes Ash Wolf in every way that matters. Or he doesn't stay at all. We do not carry passengers. Understood, Vrenna said, and something in her tone carried genuine, personal commitment beyond simple acknowledgement of her leader's terms. Gara's attention shifted back toward me directly, her expression carrying specific, evaluating weight that made clear this judgment remained genuinely, personally significant rather than simple bureaucratic formality. Human child, she said, you understand what's being decided here? I processed her question with whatever composure 10 years of hard experience had already taught me to project even through genuine terror. You're deciding whether I live. I'm deciding whether you become Ash Wolf, she corrected, her tone carrying specific, careful precision. Living or dying is a smaller question than that. If you stay, you will not be treated as human. You will be treated as one of us, expected to become one of us, trained as hard as any orc child born into this warband. Do you understand the difference? I didn't, not fully, not in that specific moment. But I understood enough to recognize that whatever she was offering represented something considerably larger than simple survival, genuine belonging, however demanding its terms, rather than the specific conditional tolerance that had defined my entire previous existence among my own birth people. I understand, I said, though I suspect my actual comprehension remained considerably incomplete compared to what I would eventually learn across the years that followed. Gara studied me for one final, weighted moment, then nodded with the specific finality of decision genuinely made rather than simply considered. Then he trains. Starting today. Brenna, he's your responsibility. If he fails to become what this warband requires, that failure is yours to answer for. I understand, Brenna said, and I would learn across subsequent years that she took this responsibility with a seriousness that shaped considerably more of my development than simple obligation typically produces. That evening, sitting near the warband's fire while orc women who'd killed everyone I'd previously traveled with moved through their ordinary evening routines around me, I processed the specific, overwhelming strangeness of a day that had begun with expected death and concluded with something I didn't yet have proper words for. Brenna sat beside me, her considerable presence carrying none of the warmth I'd have recognized from human caregivers, but something else entirely as specific, careful attention that felt, even in that first uncertain evening, considerably more genuine than anything my birth parents had ever directed toward me. "You're afraid," she said. "Not quite a question." "Yes. Good. Fear that makes you careful keeps you alive. Fear that makes you useless gets you killed. We'll find out which kind you carry." She studied the fire for a long moment, then added something I wouldn't fully understand the weight of until years later. "I had a son once. Human raiders killed him, along with most of my first warband, many years before you were born. I don't tell you this for sympathy. I tell you this because when I found you hiding in that brush, I recognized something in your face that reminded me of him. That's the actual reason you're alive tonight, not simple mercy." I didn't have an adequate response to this revelation, sitting in the specific, overwhelming exhaustion of a day too large to properly process, surrounded by orc warriors whose culture and language, an entire way of understanding the world, remained almost completely foreign to whatever narrow experience my 10 years of human life had previously provided. "What happens now?" I asked, finally, the specific question that felt most immediately urgent beneath everything else I didn't yet know how to properly process. "Now," Vrenna said, "you sleep. Tomorrow, you begin learning what it actually means to be Ashwolf. It will be hard. Harder than anything your human life has taught you to expect. But if you survive that training, if you actually become what this warband requires," she paused, studying me with an expression I still couldn't fully categorize, though I would learn, across years of subsequent familiarity, to recognize it as something approaching genuine, if carefully guarded, affection. "Then you'll have something your birth parents apparently never valued you enough to provide. A place that's actually genuinely yours." I slept that night in a warband camp full of orc warriors who'd killed my previous captors, surrounded by a language I barely understood and customs I couldn't yet properly navigate. And somehow, despite every reasonable expectation my brief, difficult life had previously established, I slept without the particular fear that had characterized every previous night since my parents first sold me for the price of cheap wine. Something had changed that day in the Valley Pass, considerably beyond simple survival. I didn't yet understand exactly what that change actually meant, or how thoroughly it would eventually reshape every aspect of who I would become. But I understood, even that first uncertain night, that whatever came next would be different from everything that had come before. And for a 10-year-old boy who'd never once been offered anything beyond simple conditional tolerance, different felt, against every reasonable expectation, like something considerably closer to hope. Tomorrow, Vrinna had promised, my training would begin. I didn't yet know what that training would actually require, or how thoroughly it would eventually transform me from the frightened, discarded child I currently was into something else entirely. But I intended, even in that first exhausted, uncertain night, to become whatever this warband actually required. Whatever the cost, whatever the difficulty, I had nothing left to return to. And for the first time in my brief, difficult existence, I had something genuinely, considerably worth becoming instead. Training began before dawn the following morning, Vrinna waking me with the specific brisk efficiency of someone who'd apparently decided that gentleness, however genuinely felt beneath her gruff exterior, wouldn't serve whatever transformation this warband actually required of me. "Up," she said, her voice carrying none of the previous evening's careful, personal revelation. Ashwolf, rise before the sun. Sleeping late is a habit for people who expect someone else to keep watch while they rest. I learned, across that first exhausting week, that the warband's daily rhythm carried almost nothing in common with whatever structure my previous, difficult human existence had established. Physical conditioning before proper light running, climbing, the specific brutal calisthenics that Vrinna insisted my scrawny, malnourished frame required before any actual weapon training could reasonably begin. Language lessons woven through ordinary conversation rather than formal instruction. The Draken tongue's guttural, precise syllables gradually becoming less foreign as weeks accumulated into the specific fluency that immersion apparently produces faster than any deliberate study. Not every member of the warband welcomed my presence with Vrinna's particular, hard-won acceptance. Several of the younger warriors regarded me with open, unconcealed suspicion during those first weeks. The specific resentment of people who'd lost family and kin to human raids similar to whatever violence had presumably claimed portions of their own warband's history. Human, one of them a warrior named Threska, younger than Vrinna, but carrying her own considerable, visible battle scars, said during my second week, watching my clumsy attempts at the physical conditioning Vrinna insisted upon. Weak. Slow. Why does Vrinna waste effort on this? Because Gara commanded it, Vrinna replied, her tone carrying specific, warning weight that Threska apparently recognized well enough to withdraw her open scorn, though the underlying skepticism remained visible beneath whatever surface compliance Vrinna's seniority commanded. I processed this hostility with the specific determined resolve that 10 years of conditional human tolerance had already prepared me to expect and endure. If proving my worth required considerably more effort than simple orc children apparently needed to demonstrate, I intended to provide exactly that additional effort, rather than simply accepting whatever dismissal my human nature seemed to invite. My first proper weapons instruction began during the third week, when Vrinna judged my physical conditioning sufficiently improved to justify actual combat training rather than simple, exhausting preparation. Skara, Vrinna said, introducing me to a warrior whose bearing carried the specific, unmistakable confidence of genuine mastery, will teach you blade work. She is the finest sword among us. Listen to everything she says, exactly as she says it. Skara studied me with an expression carrying considerably less warmth than even Vrinna's gruff acceptance, her attention carrying the specific, purely professional assessment of someone evaluating raw material rather than personal investment in my particular well-being. Human children have soft bones, she said, addressing this observation toward Vrinna rather than directly toward me, the specific dismissive quality that made clear she considered my presence a professional obligation rather than genuine personal interest. This will take longer than training our own young. Then we start now, and we don't waste time complaining about the difficulty, Vrenna replied, her tone carrying specific, unwavering expectation. Skara's training proved genuinely, brutally demanding orc blade forms designed for considerably larger frames and greater natural strength than my own small, human body currently possessed, adapted through Skara's careful, if entirely unsentimental, modification to account for exactly the physical limitations she'd predicted. Your reach is shorter, she said during one particularly exhausting early session, adjusting my grip on the practice blade with brief, efficient correction. Compensate through speed, not strength you don't have. Orc strength comes from size. Your strength, if you ever develop any, will come from precision. I trained with Skara daily across subsequent weeks, my hands developing the specific calluses and my body developing the specific conditioning that gradually, incrementally transformed my initial clumsy inadequacy into something approaching genuine, if still developing, competence. Nashka, the Warband's finest archer, began my parallel instruction in bow work roughly a month into my integration, her teaching style carrying considerably more patience than Skara's brisk efficiency, though no less demanding in its actual standards. Breathe, she said during my first proper lesson, adjusting my stance with careful, deliberate correction. Human children rush everything, try to prove themselves too quickly. The bow doesn't reward rushing. The bow rewards patience. I found, across subsequent weeks of Nashka's careful instruction, a specific quality of calm that the archery training provided beyond what Skara's more aggressive blade work demanded, the particular meditative focus that drawing and releasing a bow properly seemed to require, a skill that gradually revealed itself as considerably more suited to my own temperament than the raw physical aggression Skara's teaching emphasized. You have good eyes, Nashka observed, during one session roughly 2 months into my training, watching my arrow find its target with increasing, if still developing, consistency. Better than most beginners, human or orc. Perhaps the bow suits you better than the blade. Skara says I need both, I said, working through the specific pride her observation had produced against the practical reality of my continued, comprehensive training requirements. Skara is right, but everyone has a strength that matters more than their other skills. Yours may prove to be this. Nashka's expression carried something approaching genuine warmth beneath her usual careful reserve, the specific quality that would eventually develop, across subsequent years, into something considerably closer to genuine friendship than simple instructional obligation. I developed, during these early months of training, a particular friendship with a young orc girl named Rukta, roughly my own age, born into the war band rather than adopted through whatever unusual circumstance had brought me among them. She approached me during my 3rd month, while I was practicing solo blade form Skara had assigned, her expression carrying the specific direct curiosity of childhood unfiltered by whatever adult caution the older warriors maintained around my continued, uncertain presence. You're bad at this, she observed, watching my clumsy repetition of a form Skara had demonstrated perhaps a dozen times already. I'm working on it. I could show you. I've been training since I could walk. She studied me with the specific, evaluating attention that children apparently deploy regardless of species, weighing whether continued interaction might prove interesting or simply tedious. Why do you want to be Ash Wolf so badly? You're human. You could probably find human people somewhere who'd take you in, instead of working this hard to become something you're not. I processed her question with the specific honest consideration that our developing, if uncertain, friendship seemed to warrant. I don't think there's anywhere else that would actually want me. My own parents didn't. This is the first place that's asked me to actually become something, rather than just tolerating my presence. Rukta considered this with visible, thoughtful attention beyond what I initially expected from someone our shared young age. That's sad. But also she paused, working through whatever conclusion her consideration was producing also may be good. If you actually become Ash Wolf properly, not just pretend at it, then it won't matter that you started human. You'll just be Ash Wolf, same as me. Do you actually believe that? I don't know yet, but I'll help you train if you want. It'll go faster with someone showing you the mistakes you can't see yourself making. She offered this with the specific practical generosity that would come to define our subsequent, years-long friendship, unburdened by whatever complicated adult politics my presence apparently generated among the Warband's older, more experienced warriors. Our friendship developed steadily across subsequent months. Rukta's genuine, uncomplicated acceptance providing crucial counterbalance to whatever lingering skepticism warriors like Threska continued directing toward my uncertain presence within their warband. The first genuine test of my developing capability arrived roughly 6 months into my training, when the Warband scouts reported a pack of dire wolves' genuine predatory threat, rather than simple wildlife nuisances talking territory, close enough to our current camp to represent legitimate concern. You'll join the hunting party, Vrenna announced, her tone carrying specific, deliberate weight that made clear this wasn't simple casual inclusion, but genuine test of accumulated training. 6 months of preparation. Time to see what it's actually produced. I processed this announcement with specific, mounting anxiety beneath whatever confidence 6 months of demanding training had gradually built genuine, dangerous combat considerably beyond the controlled practice sessions that had defined my development thus far. The hunt itself proved genuinely harrowing. The dire wolves pack considerably more coordinated and dangerous than my limited experience had adequately prepared me to expect despite Vrenna and Skara's careful, comprehensive instruction. I fought alongside warriors whose combat experience vastly exceeded my own modest 6 months. My blade work Skara's careful adaptation for my smaller frame, finally proving its practical value finding genuine, if imperfect, purchase against a threat that would have easily overwhelmed my earlier, untrained self. I took a wound during the engagement's chaotic middle exchanges, a wolf's claws finding purchase across my forearm before Rukta's own blade, moving with considerably more confident precision than my own developing skill currently permitted, dispatched the immediate threat. We won the engagement, the pack survivors retreating rather than continuing what had become, through the Warband's coordinated combat capability, a genuinely losing confrontation for the wolves' continued aggression. Vrenna examined my wound afterward with a specific, careful attention that had characterized her guardianship since that first uncertain evening, her expression carrying something I hadn't previously seen directed toward Mejanuine, if carefully understated, pride. First blood, she said, treating the wound with practiced efficiency. Every Ashwolf carries scars from their first real fight. This one is yours. Did I do well enough? I asked the specific question that 6 months of demonstrated effort had made genuinely, urgently important to properly answer. You survived. You contributed. You didn't freeze or run, even when the fighting became genuinely dangerous. Vrenna's expression carried specific, measured satisfaction beneath her usual careful reserve. That's considerably more than adequate for 6 months of training against a threat that experienced warriors sometimes struggle against. Skara and Nashka will be pleased with what their instruction has produced. Threska, present during this same aftermath, studied my wound and my continued, exhausted but genuine composure with an expression that carried something approaching grudging reconsideration. Perhaps Vrenna's effort wasn't entirely wasted. She said, the specific backhanded acknowledgement that represented, I would learn, about as much direct approval as her particular temperament typically offered anyone. I processed this hard-won validation with specific, exhausted satisfaction that evening. Sitting beside the Warband's fire with my bandaged arm and Rukta's comfortable, companionable presence beside me, considerably more settled into this strange, demanding new existence than the frightened, uncertain child who'd arrived 6 months earlier could have reasonably anticipated becoming. "Told you I'd help you get better," Rukta said, her tone carrying specific, satisfied pride in her own contribution to my continued development. "You did," I acknowledged, processing the specific, genuine warmth that our developing friendship had gradually produced despite our considerable, obvious differences. "Thank you. For today, and for every day since you first decided my terrible sword forms were worth correcting." She grinned, the specific expression that would come to define our subsequent years of shared training and gradual, mutual growth. "That's what ash wolves do for each other. You're figuring that out faster than I expected, for someone who started out human." I looked around the Warband's fire-lit camp for his careful, watchful presence, Skara and Nashka's respective instruction gradually producing genuine capability from what 6 months earlier had been simple, terrified inadequacy, Rukta's comfortable, uncomplicated friendship, even Threska's grudging, hard-won reconsideration, and I processed the specific, accumulating understanding that whatever I'd been offered that first terrible day in the Valley Pass had already begun producing something considerably more significant than simple survival. I was becoming, gradually, genuinely, exactly what Gara had specified that first uncertain evening. Not human tolerated among orcs, but something considerably more integrated, considerably more genuinely earned. Ashwolf, whatever that word actually fully meant, I intended to keep earning it one difficult training session, one genuine test, one hard-won scar at a time. The years between my 6th month among the Ashwolf Sisterhood and my 16th birthday compress, in memory, into something closer to a single continuous season than the actual, considerable span of time, they genuinely represented training that never fully stopped, wandering across territories whose geography gradually became as familiar to me as whatever human landscape I'd otherwise have grown up within. The specific accumulated transformation that patient, sustained effort produces when measured across years rather than single dramatic moments. Skara's blade instruction progressed from basic forms into genuine, sophisticated technique. My smaller frame's limitations gradually compensated through exactly the speed and precision she predicted would eventually prove more valuable than simple orc strength I would never naturally possess. "You stop fighting like you're apologizing for being smaller," she observed during a sparring session roughly 3 years into my training, the specific backhanded compliment that represented, from Skara specifically, considerable genuine praise. "Good. Apologiti fighters di. Confident fighters, even small ones, sometimes survive." Nashka's archery instruction similarly deepened across these years, my accuracy and patience developing into something that both my teacher and, increasingly, the broader warband recognized as genuine, distinctive skill rather than simple adequate competence. You could hunt for the entire warband if circumstances required it, Nashka told me, during my 14th year, watching arrows find increasingly difficult targets with a specific consistency that years of patient practice had gradually produced. That's not simple flattery, Kale. That's professional assessment from someone who's trained archers for longer than you've been alive. I learned, across these same years, the considerable weight of Draken history and culture that Vrenna and the Warband's other elders gradually share the ancient conflicts between orc and human kingdoms. The specific cyclical brutality of raid and retaliation that had shaped generations of mutual hostility long before either side could clearly articulate the original grievance that started it all. "Humans call us monsters," Vrenna told me, during one evening conversation that occurred roughly midway through these formative years, because it's easier to kill something you've decided isn't genuinely people. We call humans weak and treacherous for similar reasons, easier to raid what you've decided doesn't deserve genuine consideration. But you raided that caravan, killed everyone except me. Yes, and I don't pretend that violence was anything other than exactly what it was. Her expression carried specific, unflinching honesty that I would come to recognize as characteristic of her particular integrity. I'm not telling you orcs are innocent, Kale. I'm telling you the actual history is considerably more complicated than either side's simple, comfortable narrative admits. This complexity crystallized into something considerably more personal and immediate during my 15th year, when the war band encountered direct, undeniable evidence of exactly the kind of human cruelty that Vrenna's own history with her lost son had previously only abstractly suggested. We came across the aftermath of what had clearly been a smaller Orc clan settlement, roughly a day's travel from our own current camp, not rated for resources in whatever manner constituted the Ashwolf Sisterhood's own particular warrior tradition, but simply, comprehensively destroyed. Every structure burned, every inhabitant, including what were unmistakably children too young to represent any genuine combat threat, killed with a thoroughness that suggested deliberate extermination rather than simple resource conflict. Kingdom soldiers, Skara said, examining the specific markers left among the destruction banners, equipment, the particular military organization that distinguished sanctioned royal forces from simple bandit raiders. Valemor's colors. This wasn't raiding. This was a message. I processed the scene's genuine, comprehensive horror with specific, mounting understanding that reframed everything I'd previously absorbed about the conflict between our peoples. Whatever violence the Ashwolf Sisterhood's own raiding tradition represented, it operated according to something resembling actual rules: resources taken, combatants engaged, but this specific atrocity represented something considerably darker: the deliberate, comprehensive elimination of people whose only genuine crime was existing as orcs within territory Valemor's kingdom apparently considered exclusively its own. This is what they actually want, Vrenna said, her voice carrying specific, controlled fury beneath careful composure. Not simple conflict resolution, not negotiated peace. Complete elimination, dressed up in whatever justification makes it easier for their soldiers to sleep afterward. I stood among the destruction, processing implications that settled with specific, crystallizing weight regarding my own continued identity and loyalty. I had been born human. I carried human blood, human physical limitations that Skara's careful instruction had spent years compensating for rather than eliminating entirely. But watching the specific, comprehensive horror of what human soldiers had apparently done to people whose only crime was sharing my adoptive family's heritage, I understood with sudden and complete clarity that whatever remained of my original human identity mattered considerably less than the choice I'd already been gradually making across 5 years of accumulated training and belonging. I am Ashwolf, I said, the words carrying specific, deliberate weight beyond simple casual statement. Whatever blood I was born with, whatever this I gestured toward the destruction surrounding us represents about what my birth people apparently believe orcs deserve, I'm not that. I'm what you've all spent years helping me become. Vrenna studied me with an expression carrying specific, genuine weight beyond simple approval, something closer to recognition that a decision she'd initiated 5 years earlier in that valley pass had genuinely, comprehensively succeeded in ways that extended considerably beyond simple combat competence. Then we bury what remains of these people properly, she said, and we remember exactly what this represents. The next time anyone suggests that peace with Valemor's kingdom might prove genuinely possible without considerable, continued struggle first. My formal Kamingafij battle, the specific ritual combat that marked full, unquestioned acceptance as a blooded Ashwolf warrior rather than simply a trainee still proving continued worth, occurred roughly 6 months after this devastating encounter, during my 16th year, against a genuine, significant threat that the Warband scouts identified roughly 2 days before the actual engagement. A troll, considerably dangerous by any reasonable combat classification, had established territory that threatened several trade routes the Warband depended upon for occasional, careful interaction with sympathetic human settlements willing to trade rather than simply attack on sight. "This is your test," Gara told me directly, her presence carrying the same weighted authority that had first evaluated my worth 5 years earlier. Not simple training exercise. Genuine, dangerous combat that determines whether you're finally, fully Ashwolf, or whether you remain, despite everything, simply human wearing our customs. I processed this challenge with specific, focused determination beneath obvious, mounting anxiety. 5 years of accumulated training, facing genuine, decisive test against opposition that considerably exceeded the dire wolves pack that had marked my earlier, more modest first blood. The engagement itself, fought alongside Skara, Nashka, and several other senior warband warriors rather than facing the troll entirely alone, tested every accumulated skill those 5 years of patient, demanding instruction had gradually developed. I took considerable damage during the engagement's most dangerous exchanges, a troll's considerable strength finding purchase against my defensive positioning despite Skara's careful instruction, forcing genuine, desperate improvisation beyond simple, rehearsed technique. But I also, during the engagement's crucial turning point, found an opening that my own particular combination of speed and precision, exactly the compensating strength Skara had spent years developing specifically to counter my natural physical limitations, allowed me to exploit in ways that considerably larger, stronger orc warriors might have approached entirely differently. I delivered what proved the decisive strike, my blade finding the troll's one genuine vulnerability through exactly the kind of precise, patient technique that both Skara's blade instruction and Nashka's archer-derived patience had gradually, collaboratively developed within me across 5 years of accumulated training. The troll fell. The engagement concluded, and Gara, examining both the successful outcome and my own considerable, battle-worn condition, delivered judgment that I'd spent 5 years working toward without fully understanding how genuinely significant its eventual confirmation would actually feel. "Kale of the Ashwolf Sisterhood," she said, using my name combined with the Warband's identity for the first time in formal, deliberate acknowledgement. "You have earned your place among us, not through simple mercy or Vrenna's personal attachment, but through genuine, demonstrated capability and character. You are Ashwolf, fully, unquestionably, for as long as you choose to remain among us." The celebration that followed that evening carried specific, genuine warmth from warriors who'd spent years watching my gradual development. Even Threska, whose early skepticism had gradually transformed into genuine respect across our shared years of training and combat, offered formal acknowledgement that carried considerable weight given her own particular reserve. "You fought well," she said, the specific direct simplicity that represented, from her particular temperament, about as much genuine praise as she typically offered anyone. "I was wrong 5 years ago to doubt Vrenna's judgment. You become genuinely Ashwolf, whatever blood you started with." Rukta, whose own friendship had developed across these same years into something considerably deeper than simple childhood companionship, embraced me with the specific enthusiasm that our shared, considerable history had gradually earned. "Told you, 5 years ago, I told you it wouldn't matter that you started human if you actually became Ashwolf properly. You did tell me that I acknowledge processing the specific, accumulated weight of everything these years had gradually built genuine skill, genuine belonging, genuine identity that no longer felt like something I was still working to prove, but simply, comprehensively, who I actually was. Vrenna approached last, her expression carrying specific, considerable emotion beneath her usual careful reserve, the particular weight of 5 years accumulated investment finally, genuinely validated. "I told you, that first night," she said, "that you'd have something your birth parents never valued you enough to provide. A place that's actually genuinely yours." She studied me with an expression that carried, for perhaps the first time since that initial rescue, something approaching unguarded, genuine pride. "You've built that place yourself, Kale. Through 5 years of effort, I've simply had the privilege of guiding. Whatever comes next, for however long our paths continue together, I am genuinely, considerably proud to call you my son." I processed this acknowledgement with specific, overwhelming emotion that 5 years of accumulated training hadn't fully prepared me to properly manage the particular weight of finally, comprehensively belonging somewhere that had chosen me as thoroughly as I'd chosen it. Whatever challenges lay ahead and the destroyed Orc settlement we'd encountered months earlier suggested those challenges would prove considerably more significant than simple, continued wandering and occasional, not passenger carried through obligation or pity. Genuinely, comprehensively, there's exactly as Gara had specified 5 years earlier, and exactly as 5 years of accumulated effort had finally completely earned. 2 years after my formal acceptance as blooded Ashwolf, the Kingdom of Valemor's continued campaign against our people escalated into something considerably more organized and dangerous than the sporadic, if brutal, military encounters that had previously characterized our conflict. General Roderick Vane assumed command of Valemor's eastern border forces during this period, his reputation preceding him through the specific network of information the Warband maintained regarding significant human military developments. A commander whose personal history, we gradually learned, included the loss of his own family during an Orc raid on a border settlement nearly 15 years earlier. "He's not simply following orders," Vrenna observed during one of our regular strategic discussions regarding the kingdom's shifting military posture. "He's pursuing something personal, dressed up in official military justification. That makes him considerably more dangerous than simple bureaucratic enforcement." Vane's campaigns proved this assessment accurate within months. Coordinated military operations against Orc settlements and war bands throughout the border territories, executed with a thoroughness and strategic sophistication that considerably exceeded whatever sporadic, if brutal, violence had previously characterized Valemor's approach to what its officials apparently termed the Orc problem. We felt this escalation directly during my 18th year, when Vane's forces intercepted our warband during what should have been routine seasonal migration between established territories. The engagement proved genuinely, catastrophically costly. Vane's soldiers, unlike the disorganized border patrols we'd previously encountered, fought with disciplined, coordinated tactics that neutralized whatever advantage our warband's individual combat superiority typically provided against less sophisticated human opposition. I fought alongside Rukta and the warband's other warriors through hours of brutal, sustained engagement, my own accumulated skill finding genuine, if costly, purchase against soldiers whose individual combat capability, while inferior to any single Ashwolf warrior, compensated through numbers and coordination that our own warband's traditional combat approach struggled to adequately counter. We won, eventually, through exactly the kind of hard-fought, costly victory that left considerably more permanent damage than simple momentary crisis resolution. Several warriors seriously wounded, 2 younger members of the warband killed outright, Skara herself taking damage to her sword arm that Nashka's careful medical attention confirmed would likely produce permanent, if manageable, limitation to her previously exceptional combat capability. I sat with Skara during her recovery, processing the specific, sobering weight of watching someone whose considerable mastery had shaped my own development, now facing genuine, permanent limitation. "I'll adapt," she said, her tone carrying specific, characteristic determination beneath obvious frustration. "I adapted your training to compensate for your natural limitations. I can adapt my own technique to compensate for this one." "That's not the point," I said, working through the specific, mounting concern that this engagement's genuine cost had crystallized into something considerably larger than simple, immediate grief. "The point is that Vane's forces are becoming more organized, more dangerous, faster than our traditional wandering approach can adequately counter. We can't keep absorbing this kind of cost every time his campaigns intensify." Gara, present during this same conversation, studied me with the specific evaluating attention that had characterized her assessment of my worth since that very first uncertain evening years earlier. "You have something specific in mind," she said, not quite a question. I processed my own developing thoughts with careful, deliberate attention, recognizing that whatever I was about to propose represented something considerably larger than simple tactical adjustment. "We need somewhere permanent, somewhere defensible, that doesn't require us constantly exposing ourselves to exactly this kind of coordinated ambush during vulnerable migration between territories. The Ashwolf Sisterhood has never maintained permanent settlement," Gara said, her tone carrying specific, careful consideration rather than immediate dismissal. "Our entire tradition is built around wandering, seeking battle and challenge rather than static defense." "I understand the tradition," I said, working through the specific respectful but genuinely urgent argument that mounting losses had increasingly convinced me this moment actually required. "But tradition that gets our warriors killed through vulnerability we could otherwise address isn't serving whatever purpose it originally represented. Vane's forces are only going to become more organized, more dangerous. If we don't adapt our approach, we're going to keep losing people we can't afford to lose." Vrenna, listening to this exchange with visible, careful attention, offered her own perspective with the specific weight of someone whose personal losses gave her particular authority regarding exactly this kind of strategic consideration. "He's not wrong, Gara. I lost my first son to human raiders 15 years before I found Kale. I don't want to lose the family I've built since then to exactly the same kind of escalating violence, simply because tradition insists we can't adapt our approach." Gara considered this extended perspective with visible, genuine deliberation, her expression carrying specific, weighted consideration that made clear this decision carried considerable significance beyond simple, immediate tactical adjustment. "A permanent settlement," she said, "finally, would require resources our traditional raiding approach has never needed to accumulate at this scale. Stone, timber, tools, considerable labor beyond what our current warband alone could reasonably provide." "I have an idea about that too," I said, processing the specific, developing strategy that recent months of observing both our warband's traditional resource gathering methods and my own gradually accumulated understanding of human settlement's economic structure had begun crystallizing into genuine, actionable plan. "Explain," Gara said, her tone carrying specific, genuine interest beyond simple polite consideration. "I can pass as human," I said, working through the implication with careful, deliberate clarity. "Not perfectly, perhaps, but well enough to move through human settlements without immediately triggering the kind of hostile suspicion our warband's presence would obviously produce. I could purchase materials directly, using resources from our traditional raiding, without exposing our actual settlement location or intentions to whatever military response direct confrontation would otherwise invite. You're suggesting we combine our traditional raiding with your particular, unique capacity to operate within human society directly," Gara said, working through the strategic implications with visible, careful consideration. Yes, raid supply caravans and lightly defended resources for materials we can't easily purchase. Use human currency acquired through those same raids to purchase what we can obtain more safely through direct trade rather than confrontation. Build something permanent, defensible, using both approaches combined rather than relying entirely on either traditional method alone. The strategic council that followed over subsequent days involved considerably more debate and consideration than I'd initially anticipated. Several warband members expressing genuine, understandable skepticism regarding both the fundamental shift away from traditional nomadic practice and the specific, considerable risk my proposed human integration strategy would require me personally to undertake. If you're discovered, Skara said, during one particularly intense discussion, her injured arm still bound in careful support. If Vailmore's forces identify you as Ashwolf operating within their territory, the consequences would prove considerably worse than simple combat engagement. You'd face whatever specific cruelty their justice system reserved for what they'd consider genuine betrayal a human they'd view as having chosen Orcs over his own people. I understand the risk, I said, processing the specific, genuine danger her warning represented without diminishing the considerable conviction that recent losses had crystallized within my continued strategic thinking. But the alternative is continuing exactly the vulnerable, exposed pattern that just cost us 2 warriors and your own arm's full capability. I'm willing to accept personal risk if it means building something that actually protects our people going forward. Gara's eventual decision, delivered after several days of careful, comprehensive deliberation, provided formal authorization for exactly the strategy I'd proposed, though carrying specific, considerable conditions that made clear this represented genuine institutional risk rather than simple casual approval. We will attempt this, she said, addressing the assembled war band with her characteristic, weighted authority. Kale will begin scouting appropriate settlement locations, while simultaneously developing whatever human-facing capability his unique nature allows for resource acquisition. This is not abandonment of Ashwolf tradition. This is adaptation, exactly as our tradition has always required when circumstances genuinely demand it. I processed this authorization with specific, mounting weight regarding the considerable responsibility now genuinely, formally my not simple personal ambition, but genuine institutional trust that carry the Warband's actual continued safety as its practical, immediate stake. Rukta approached me that evening, her expression carrying specific, complicated concern beneath her usual confident bearing. You're actually going to do this. Walk into human settlements, pretend to be simply human, while secretly building something they consider genuine threat if they understood what you were actually doing. Someone has to, I said, meeting her concern with the specific resolve clarity that mounting strategic necessity had increasingly crystallized within my own thinking. I'm the only one among us who can actually pass convincingly enough to attempt it. I know. She paused, working through whatever specific worry her hesitation represented. I don't want to lose you to this, the way we've already lost people to Vane's escalating campaigns. Be careful, Kale. Whatever you're building, make sure you're actually there to see it completed. I intend to be, I said, processing the specific, genuine weight of her concern alongside my own considerable, mounting determination. This isn't simple risk for its own sake. This is building something that actually protects everyone I care about, going forward, rather than continuing to lose people to exactly the kind of vulnerability we've spent years simply accepting as unavoidable tradition. I began, over subsequent weeks, the specific careful preparation that this ambitious strategy genuinely required studying human customs and speech patterns with considerably more deliberate attention than my childhood immersion had originally provided, developing cover identity and practical knowledge that would allow me to move through human settlements without triggering immediate, obvious suspicion. The weight of what I was attempting settled with specific, growing significance as preparation preceded not simple, continued survival, but genuine, deliberate construction of something that might actually shift the entire trajectory of conflict between our peoples, assuming I could successfully navigate the considerable risk that operating between two entirely different worlds genuinely represented. Whatever came next, I understood, standing at the threshold of this ambitious, uncertain strategy, that I was no longer simply defending what the Ash Wolf Sisterhood had already built. I was attempting to construct something considerably larger, genuine, permanent sanctuary that might finally break the exhausting, costly cycle of vulnerability that generations of traditional wandering had apparently never fully managed to escape. The Empire's shadow continued lengthening across our territories, General Vane's campaigns growing more sophisticated with each passing season. But for the first time since witnessing that devastated Orc settlement 2 years earlier, I felt something beyond simple, grim determination to survive whatever violence continued arriving. I felt genuine, deliberate purpose, the specific conviction that whatever I was building might actually prove capable of ending this particular cycle of loss, rather than simply enduring it indefinitely. My first solo journey into human territory began roughly a month after Gara's formal authorization, the specific accumulated preparation of that intervening month producing what I hoped represented sufficient cover to move through Valemor's border settlements without triggering immediate, obvious suspicion. I traveled as Kale Ashworth, a name I'd constructed specifically for this purpose, carrying enough resemblance to legitimate human naming convention to avoid obvious scrutiny while distant enough from my actual, single-name Ashwolf identity that I could mentally maintain clear separation between my two increasingly complicated existences. The border town of Millhaven Crossing represented my first genuine Testamatis trading settlement close enough to Orc territory that its merchants maintained practical, if wary, business relationships with occasional human traders who dealt in materials useful for frontier construction. Distant enough from major population centers that scrutiny remained considerably more relaxed than whatever formal oversight larger settlements presumably maintained. I approached the town's primary supply merchant, a weathered man named Corwin Hask, whose reputation, according to careful information Vrenna's own occasional human contacts had provided, carried specific willingness toward discretion regarding customers' actual intended use for whatever materials he sold. Stone working tools, quality timber, iron fixtures, I said, presenting my prepared cover story with whatever composure weeks of deliberate practice had allowed me to project. I'm establishing a homestead further east, beyond the usual settled territory. Need materials sufficient for genuine, permanent construction rather than simple temporary shelter. Hask studied me with the specific evaluating attention of someone who'd conducted considerable business with customers whose actual circumstances didn't always match their stated explanation. East of settled territory. That's Orc country, more or less, whatever official maps claim about kingdom borders. I processed his observation with careful, deliberate calm, recognizing that whatever response I offered would significantly determine this crucial initial interaction's outcome. I'm aware of the risk. The land's cheaper precisely because most people consider it too dangerous for permanent settlement. I'm willing to accept that risk for property I can actually afford, rather than competing for increasingly scarce, expensive land closer to established kingdom territory. Hask considered this explanation with visible, extended deliberation, then apparently decided my particular circumstances, whatever genuine truth they actually represented, fell within whatever category of customer business he preferred not examining too closely. I don't ask too many questions about where materials actually end up, he said, finally, his tone carrying specific, practical acknowledgement. Coin spins the same regardless of whatever risk you're personally willing to accept. What exactly do you need? This first successful transaction established what became, across subsequent months, a genuine, sustainable pattern. Careful, incremental purchases distributed across multiple settlements and merchants to avoid the kind of concentrated, suspicious volume that might otherwise attract unwanted attention. Funded through resources our warband's traditional rating continued providing against military supply caravans and lightly defended resource depots that Vrena and Gara judged appropriate targets. Under our adjusted strategic approach, I developed, across these months, genuine, if carefully limited, relationships within several border settlements, the specific calculated networking that legitimate commercial activity required, balanced against constant, underlying awareness that any misstep might reveal considerably more than simple, unusual homesteading ambition. The near-discovery incident that tested this careful balance most severely occurred during my third month of regular human-facing operation in a slightly larger settlement called Thornbridge, where I'd traveled to negotiate purchase of considerable iron fixtures beyond what Millhaven Crossing's more modest supply typically provided. I was examining merchandise in Thornbridge's primary trading hall when a voice behind me carried specific, immediate alarm that instinct recognized before conscious thought fully processed the actual words. "You, I know that scar pattern." I turned to find a hunter, one of the specialized soldiers Valemore employed specifically for monster tracking and elimination work, his expression carrying dawning, dangerous recognition, studying the specific old injury along my left forearm, a scar I'd acquired during that formative dire wolf hunt years earlier, marked in a pattern that apparently carried recognizable significance to someone professionally familiar with orc combat customs. "I'm not certain what you're referring to," I said, processing the crisis with whatever composure years of Ashwolf training had built into increasingly reliable instinct, even through genuine, mounting danger. "That scar, that's an orc combat mark from a dire wolf's claws, positioned exactly the way orc warriors typically carry them after their first blooding." His hand moved toward the weapon at his hip, his stance shifting toward genuine professional readiness. "How does a human trader come by an orc warrior's battle scar?" I processed the crisis with specific, urgent calculation, recognizing that whatever response I offered in the next several seconds would likely determine considerably more than simple continued cover. Genuine, immediate physical danger from someone professionally trained and equipped specifically for confronting exactly the kind of threat my actual nature represented. I spent considerable time as a captive among orc raiders. Several years back, I said, constructing careful, plausible deception with the specific speed that genuine crisis apparently demanded. Escaped eventually, but not before acquiring several injuries during my captivity. I don't particularly enjoy discussing the experience, if you'll forgive my reluctance to elaborate further. The hunter's expression carried specific, extended evaluation, his hand remaining near his weapon despite my explanation's surface plausibility. Captive orcs don't typically escape, and that scar pattern is specifically ceremonial, not simple combat injury. I've studied orc customs extensively for my professional work. I processed his continued suspicion with mounting, genuine alarm, recognizing that my constructed explanation wasn't proving sufficient against someone whose specific professional expertise apparently exceeded whatever general human ignorance I'd previously counted on encountering. "Is there a problem here?" A new voice interjected. Hask himself, whose own business relationship with me had developed sufficient practical trust across preceding months that his intervention carried genuine, if calculated, weight. "This gentleman's been a reliable customer for months now. Paid honest coin. No trouble whatsoever." The hunter's attention shifted toward Hask with visible, if reluctant, reconsideration, The specific practical credibility of established local business relationship apparently carrying weight that my own individual explanation alone hadn't sufficiently provided. You vouch for him specifically? The hunter asked, his suspicion visibly, if incompletely, diminishing under Hask's intervention. I vouch for his coin being good and his business being straightforward, Hask said, his tone carrying specific, practical diplomacy that avoided fully committing to whatever deeper claim the hunter's question actually implied. Whatever happened to him among orc raiders, that's his own business, not mine to investigate on your behalf. The hunter studied me for one final, extended moment, his professional suspicion visibly wrestling against the practical absence of any concrete evidence beyond a scar whose significance, however professionally recognized, didn't definitively prove anything beyond circumstantial possibility. Be more careful about which old injuries you display prominently, he said, finally, his tone carrying specific, unresolved warning despite apparently deciding against immediate, direct confrontation. Not every hunter will accept simple captive escape explanation as readily as I'm currently choosing to. He departed with visible, continued reluctance, and I processed the crisis's narrow, uncertain resolution with specific, considerable relief that competed directly with mounting awareness of exactly how close this encounter had come to catastrophic exposure. You should probably keep that arm covered going forward, Hask observed, once the hunter's departure provided sufficient privacy for franker conversation. Whatever your actual story, Isand, I suspect it's considerably more complicated than simple captive escape. That's not a risk worth repeating. I processed his careful, deliberate phrasing with specific, mounting understanding that Hask's own suspicion regarding my actual circumstances likely extended considerably further than his surface intervention had directly acknowledged. Thank you, I said, choosing careful, grateful acknowledgement over whatever additional explanation might prove either unnecessary or genuinely dangerous to provide, for the intervention, and for whatever discretion you're apparently continuing to extend regarding my actual circumstances. I told you, I don't ask too many questions about where materials actually end up. His expression carried specific, weathered pragmatism beneath whatever genuine curiosity my situation apparently produced. Coin spins the same regardless. Just be more careful going forward. Not every merchant or hunter you encounter will prove equally uninterested in whatever actual truth you're protecting. I returned to warband territory that evening carrying both the considerable materials this trip had successfully secured and the sobering, crucial lesson that near discovery had provided me dual existences genuine, continued fragility against exactly the kind of professional scrutiny that increased operational scale would inevitably, eventually attract more frequently. Vrenna's reaction, upon hearing my account of the crisis, carried specific, genuine alarm beneath her usual careful composure. This is exactly the risk Skara warned about. If that hunter had pressed further, had genuine authority to detain and investigate rather than simple individual suspicion, I said, processing the crisis's genuine weight alongside continued, considerable determination that near catastrophe hadn't fully diminished. But we adapt. Long sleeves, more careful attention to whatever details might trigger similar recognition. This doesn't change the fundamental strategy. It just means executing it with more caution than I'd perhaps initially applied. Gara, present during this same debriefing, studied my account with specific, weighted consideration. The risk remains genuinely significant, but the materials you've secured across these months already represent considerable progress toward whatever permanent settlement we're attempting to construct. We continue with whatever additional caution this incident's lesson requires. I spent subsequent months refining my operational approach based on Thornbridge's crucial, narrow lesson, more careful attention to visible scarring and distinguishing marks, more strategic distribution of purchases across broader geographic range to avoid concentrated suspicion, more sophisticated cover story development that anticipated exactly the kind of professional scrutiny hunters like my Thornbridge encounter apparently represented. The construction site itself, meanwhile, began taking genuine, physical shoppy, defensible position Gara, and I had jointly selected roughly 2 months into this expanded strategy, a natural cliff formation overlooking a river confluence that provided both defensive advantage and reliable water access. The specific geographic features that would eventually, gradually transform from simple strategic selection into genuine, permanent home. Rukta joined the initial construction labor alongside myself and several other warband volunteers, her own considerable strength providing crucial contribution to the physical construction that my human-facing resource acquisition alone couldn't accomplish. "This is actually happening," she said, during one particularly demanding day of foundation work, examining the gradually emerging structure with visible, genuine wonder beneath obvious physical exhaustion. A real settlement. Something the Ash Wolf Sisterhood has never attempted in generations of tradition. "It's happening," I confirmed, processing the specific, accumulating satisfaction of watching abstract strategic concept gradually transform into genuine physical reality. Slowly, carefully, with more risk than any of us would probably prefer. But happening. I looked across the construction sites, gradually emerging foundation, processing the specific, considerable weight of everything this ambitious project actually represented, not simple tactical adjustment, but genuine, deliberate attempt to break generations of exhausting, costly cycle that traditional wandering had never fully managed to escape. Whatever risks continued human-facing operation genuinely represented, whatever near-catastrophic incidents like Thornbridge's crucial lesson continued teaching through uncomfortable, direct experience, I understood, watching this foundation gradually take shape, that the eventual result would prove worth whatever continued, careful risk its construction genuinely required. The Empire's shadow continued lengthening across our territories. But for the first time, we were building something specifically designed to withstand that shadow, rather than simply continuing to absorb whatever cost its continued escalation demanded. The fortress rose gradually across the following 2 years, its physical construction consuming considerably more resources and labor than my initial, cautious optimism had originally anticipated, but progressing steadily through the combined strategy Gara had authorized traditional raiding for materials and coin beyond what human trade alone could reasonably provide. My own continued careful operation within human settlements, securing whatever additional resources direct raid seemed unnecessarily risky to acquire. The raiding itself, I insisted from these earliest planning stages, would operate under principles considerably more restrained than whatever traditional Ashwolf practice had historically permitted. Military supply caravans, lightly defended resource depots, targets whose loss represented genuine strategic impact without requiring the kind of civilian casualties that our warband's traditional raiding, however justified by generations of mutual conflict, had never previously felt obligated to, particularly avoid. This is not how Ash Wolf tradition typically operates, Threska observed during one of our earliest raid planning sessions, her tone carrying specific, genuine skepticism regarding this fundamental adjustment to established practice. We take what we need. We don't concern ourselves with whether human civilians suffer inconvenience from resources we require. I understand the tradition, I said, working through the specific, careful argument that months of accumulated strategic thinking had gradually crystallized. But we're not simply raiding for immediate survival anymore. We're building something permanent, something that requires genuine, sustained cooperation from at least some human settlements, if we're ever going to successfully maintain trade relationships alongside whatever military conflict continues. Unnecessary civilian suffering doesn't serve that broader goal. It just creates additional enemies we don't actually need. Vrenna, present during this same discussion, offered perspective that carried specific, considerable weight given her own personal history. Kale raids military targets specifically, avoids civilian settlements entirely where reasonably possible. That's not weakness. That's strategic precision that actually serves our long-term interests better than indiscriminate traditional practice. Threska's skepticism, while not immediately eliminated, gradually diminished across subsequent months as our adjusted approach demonstrated genuine, practical effectiveness military supply raids, providing considerable resources while avoiding the kind of broader civilian retaliation that indiscriminate targeting would likely have provoked. The fortress itself gradually developed into something considerably more sophisticated than my initial, modest conception, not simple defensive structure, but genuine settlement capable of supporting permanent population, with proper housing, storage facilities for both raided and purchased materials, defensive fortification that Skara, despite her continued arm limitation, provided crucial tactical consultation regarding optimal design. Height advantage matters more than simple wall thickness, she advised during one planning session regarding the fortress's primary defensive structures. Human siege tactics typically rely on numbers and coordination. We need positioning that lets fewer defenders manage disproportionate advantage against larger, less individually skilled forces. I incorporated her tactical wisdom into design specifications. I then carried into human settlements for whatever specialized materials and occasional expert consultation. Our own limited construction knowledge required careful, incremental purchases of siege-resistant design elements that I framed during human-facing negotiations as simple, prudent homestead defense against the wildlife dangers that our stated frontier location apparently justified. The considerable challenge of uniting additional orc tribes beyond our own Ashwolf sisterhood into this developing settlement began roughly midway through the second year of construction, when word of our ambitious project apparently spread through whatever informal communication networks connected scattered orc communities throughout the broader region. The first tribe to approach us directly, a group called the Ironback clan led by a chieftain named Grask, arrived with visible, considerable skepticism regarding both our fundamental strategy and my own particular, unusual presence within what remained, despite everything, genuinely orc leadership structure. A human, Grask said, studying me with expression carrying specific, undisguised distrust during our initial diplomatic meeting, leading construction of what's meant to become genuine orc sanctuary. Forgive my considerable skepticism regarding this arrangement. I don't lead, I said, working through careful, deliberate clarification. Gara leads the Ashwolf Sisterhood. I contribute specific, useful capability resource acquisition through human-facing operation that pure combat strength alone couldn't provide. Whatever leadership role I hold is functional, not formal authority over anyone beyond my own particular contribution. Grask studied me with continued, evaluating skepticism, his attention shifting toward Gara for whatever confirmation her own authority might provide regarding my actual position and trustworthiness. He speaks accurately, Gara confirmed, her tone carrying specific, weighted authority. Kale is Ashwolf, blooded and proven through considerable trial. His human birth provides useful capability our tradition alone couldn't offer. But authority within this project remains distributed among tribal leadership, not concentrated in his individual hands. Grask's skepticism, while not immediately eliminated, gradually shifted toward cautious, provisional cooperation once direct observation of both the fortress's genuine, considerable progress, and my own demonstrated combat capability during a subsequent joint operation against Valemore forces provided concrete evidence beyond simple verbal assurance. "You fight like genuine Ashwolf," he acknowledged, following that engagement's successful conclusion, his tone carrying specific, if still measured, reconsideration. "Whatever blood you carry, your actual conduct suggests genuine, earned belonging rather than simple, convenient tolerance." The Ironback clan's eventual integration into our developing settlement established a pattern that subsequent tribes, gradually learning of our project through continued, expanding communication networks, increasingly followed initial skepticism regarding both fundamental strategy and my particular presence, followed by gradual, evidence-based reconsideration once direct observation confirmed both the settlement's genuine practical value and my own demonstrated, earned belonging within Orc. Value tradition. By the conclusion of our second construction year, the fortress which the combined tribal leadership had formally named Karsgard, incorporating both traditional Draken linguistic elements and specific acknowledgement of the considerable, collaborative effort its construction represented, housed nearly 400 orcs across what had grown into a genuine, if still developing, coalition of previously independent tribes and warbands. The scale of this achievement settled with specific, considerable weight during a formal gathering that marked the fortress's functional completion. Tribal leaders from 4 distinct groups, including our original Ashwolf sisterhood, gathered within Karsgard's primary hall to formally acknowledge the settlement's establishment and discuss continued collaborative governance. 4 tribes, Gara said, addressing the assembled leadership with her characteristic weighted authority, united not through conquest or simple convenient alliance, but through genuine, shared recognition that our traditional, scattered approach has proven increasingly insufficient against Valemore's escalating campaigns. This represents something considerably beyond simple tactical adjustment. This represents genuine, deliberate transformation in how our people approach continued survival and resistance. I stood among this assembled leadership, processing the specific, accumulated weight of everything 2 years of careful, dangerous, dual identity effort had gradually produced. Not simple personal achievement, but genuine, collaborative transformation that considerably exceeded whatever initial modest strategic adjustment I'd first proposed to Gura following Skara's injury and our warband's costly encounter with Vane's coordinated forces. Rukta, standing beside me during this formal proceeding, offered quiet observation carrying specific, genuine wonder beneath her usual confident bearing. 2 years ago, this was just an idea you proposed during a difficult strategic council. Now look at what it's actually become. It's become considerably more than I initially imagined. I acknowledged, processing the specific weight of genuine achievement against continued, mounting awareness of exactly how significant a target Karsgard's growing scale and strategic significance would inevitably represent to Valemore's continued military campaigns. Vrenna approached during this same reflective moment, her expression carrying specific, considerable pride beneath her usual careful reserve. "You've built something remarkable, Kale. Something that might genuinely, finally break the exhausting cycle that's defined relations between our peoples for longer than anyone currently living can properly remember. We've built it," I corrected, processing the specific collaborative truth that this entire ambitious project had consistently required. "You, Gara, Skara's tactical wisdom, Rukta's construction labor, every tribe that took considerable risk trusting an unprecedented, uncertain strategy. This isn't simple individual achievement. But even amid this genuine, considerable satisfaction, specific concerning intelligence arrived through our continued information networks that tempered whatever comfortable celebration this achievement might otherwise have produced. "Valemore's court has noticed," Vrenna reported, during a private strategic discussion held shortly after the formal gathering's conclusion. Not simply military intelligence regarding scattered Orc activity, but genuine, high-level political attention. Lord Chancellor Aldous Kane has apparently begun advocating for what his own correspondence describes as comprehensive final resolution to what Valemor's court continues terming the Orc problem. I processed this intelligence with specific, mounting concern that considerably tempered whatever satisfaction our fortress's successful establishment had otherwise produced. Final resolution. That's not simple continued military campaign. That's something considerably more comprehensive. I believe so, Vrena confirmed, her expression carrying specific, weighted seriousness. Kane apparently views your fortress specifically as intolerable escalation proof that Orc tribes are organizing beyond whatever scattered, manageable threat level Valemor's traditional military approach has previously assumed it faced. I suspect whatever comes next will prove considerably more significant than General Vane's previous, if already substantial, campaigns. Gara, joining this discussion with her characteristic, weighted attention, processed the intelligence with specific, careful consideration. Then we prepare accordingly. Whatever comprehensive response Valemor's court is apparently developing, we need Karsgard's defenses and our continued diplomatic outreach to additional tribes, proceeding with considerably more urgency than our previous, more measured timeline anticipated. I processed this mounting threat with specific, cold clarity that 2 years of accumulated strategic experience had gradually built into increasingly reliable instinct whatever comfortable satisfaction our fortress's successful establishment had briefly provided. Genuine, mounting danger apparently approached considerably faster than our own continued construction and diplomatic efforts could necessarily match. Then we accelerate everything, I said, the specific resolved determination that mounting stakes increasingly demanded settling into renewed, urgent clarity. Continued tribal outreach, continued fortress fortification, whatever additional preparation this accelerated timeline genuinely requires. Whatever comprehensive response Valemor's court was apparently developing against our fortress's continued, successful growth, I understood, processing this sobering intelligence alongside genuine, considerable pride in everything Karsgard already represented, that our most significant challenge, yet likely approached considerably faster than comfortable timeline would have preferred. The foundations we'd built stone and blood, careful strategy and considerable sacrifice, human resource acquisition combined with traditional Orc warrior capability would soon face their most decisive, genuinely significant test. Lord Chancellor Kane's comprehensive final resolution revealed its actual, considerable scope roughly 6 weeks after Vrena's initial warning, when our intelligence networks confirmed that Valemor's court had authorized what amounted to genuine, full military mobilization against Karsgard, specifically not simple, continued border skirmishing, but a coordinated campaign explicitly designed to eliminate our fortress and everyone it currently sheltered. 15,000 soldiers, Vrena reported, during the Emergency Strategic Council that this intelligence immediately necessitated, her voice carrying specific, sobering weight beneath careful, professional delivery. Under General Vane's direct command, with additional siege equipment and support that considerably exceeds anything Valemor has previously committed against Orc territory. I processed this staggering scale with specific, cold calculation, working through implications against our own considerably more modest, if steadily growing, defensive capability. Our combined tribal strength currently stands at what? Roughly 1,200 capable warriors? 1,240, including recent additions from the Stonehide and Bloodmoon tribes who joined our coalition last month, Gara confirmed, her expression carrying specific, weighted calculation. Considerably outnumbered, but Karsgard's defensive design, combined with home territory advantage, provides meaningful compensation for that numerical disparity. The weeks that followed compressed considerable, urgent preparation into whatever time our intelligence networks suggested remained before Vane's forces actually arrived fortress fortifications receiving final, critical reinforcement. Tribal warriors coordinating unfamiliar joint tactics that our recent coalition's diverse combat traditions required careful, deliberate integration. My own continued human-facing operations shifting entirely toward whatever final, crucial resource acquisition our preparation timelines still permitted. The specific complication that reshaped this urgent preparation arrived through circumstances I hadn't fully anticipated. A captured Valemore scout. Taken during a reconnaissance patrol, our own forces intercepted roughly 2 weeks before the main campaign's anticipated arrival. Revealed information during interrogation that exposed my own carefully protected dual identity to considerably wider awareness than I'd previously maintained. They know, Vrenna told me, her expression carrying specific, urgent concern as she relayed the interrogation's crucial findings. Not simply that Karsgard exists, or that it represents unprecedented or coalition. They know specifically about you, a human, raised among orcs, apparently responsible for the resource acquisition strategy that's enabled this fortress's construction. I processed this revelation with specific, mounting complexity, recognizing implications that extended considerably beyond simple operational security. How did they identify me specifically? The scout mentioned rumors, apparently circulating among certain human settlements, regarding a young trader whose particular circumstances hold scars. Unusual knowledge of orc customs, consistent, incremental purchases across multiple locations had gradually attracted more organized attention than any single incident like your Thornbridge encounter initially suggested. Vrenna's expression carried specific, careful weight. Someone apparently connected these scattered observations into coherent, actionable intelligence. I processed this exposure with specific, complicated emotion beyond simple, immediate tactical concern recognition that whatever careful separation I'd maintained between my human birth and Ashwolf identity had apparently become considerably more publicly known than my continued operational security had assumed possible. What does this mean practically? I asked, working through implications that mounting crisis demanded I address with whatever clarity remained available. Kane's political messaging has apparently already begun incorporating this revelation, Vrenna said, her tone carrying specific, sobering weight. Not simply orc threat requiring elimination, but human traitor who's apparently chosen monsters over his own people, providing them capability that makes them considerably more dangerous than their traditional, scattered threat level. This has become considerably more personal, considerably more politically significant than simple, continued military campaign. I sat with this revelation's full weight during a quiet evening shortly before Vane's forces' anticipated arrival, processing complicated implications alongside genuine, mounting anxiety regarding the approaching confrontation's actual, staggering scale. Vrenna found me during this reflective moment, settling beside me with a specific, careful presence that had characterized her guardianship since that very first uncertain evening, now considerably deepened through years of accumulated, genuine relationship. "You're troubled," she observed, not quite a question. "They're calling me traitor," I said, processing the specific, complicated weight of this particular characterization. Not simply enemy, but someone who's betrayed his own people by choosing yours instead. "Do you believe that characterization is accurate?" Vrenna asked, her tone carrying specific, genuine curiosity rather than simple reassurance. I considered her question with the same careful, deliberate honesty that our entire relationship had gradually established as its foundation. "I don't know anymore what my own people actually means. My birth parents sold me for drink money. The caravan that owned me treated me as simple, disposable labor. All of you gave me something genuine, those people I was supposedly born to never once provided. Then perhaps traitor isn't the accurate word for what you've actually become, Brenna said, her expression carrying specific, weighted consideration. Perhaps you've simply chosen genuine family over whatever accident of birth initially, briefly claimed you. Kane's propaganda won't see that distinction. Neither will most of Vailmore's population, whatever nuanced truth actually exists beneath his political messaging. No, Vrenna acknowledged, probably not. But that's Kane's failure of understanding, not yours. You've spent 15 years becoming genuinely, comprehensively Ashwolf through effort and sacrifice and demonstrated character that no political propaganda can actually erase, regardless of whatever convenient narrative it constructs. I processed her perspective with specific, considerable comfort beneath continued, mounting anxiety regarding the approaching confrontation's genuine, staggering stakes. What if this fortress falls? What if 15 years of building genuine belonging ends in whatever comprehensive destruction Kane's campaign is apparently designed to produce? Then we face that outcome as genuinely, comprehensively Ashwolf, fighting for something worth defending, rather than simply existing as whatever scattered, vulnerable target Vailmore's traditional approach previously assumed we represented. Vrenna's expression carried specific, unwavering conviction beneath obvious, shared anxiety. I've already lost one son to this conflict's exhausting cycle, Kale. I don't intend to lose the family I've built since then without ensuring we've genuinely, thoroughly fought for everything we've collectively built. Rukta joined us during this same reflective evening, her own expression carrying specific, complicated weight beneath her usual confident bearing. I heard about the captured scout, about what Kane's court apparently knows now. Then you understand the additional complication this creates, I said, processing her presence with specific, genuine comfort despite mounting collective anxiety. 15 years of demonstrated character, Kale. Whatever political narrative Vailmore's court constructs, it doesn't change what you've actually genuinely become among us. I processed her reassurance alongside Vrenna's own similar perspective, recognizing that whatever external political characterization Kane's mobilizing propaganda apparently constructed, my genuine identity remained considerably more secure among those who'd actually witnessed 15 years of demonstrated, earned belonging. The gathered tribal leadership convened one final strategic council the evening before Vane's forces confirmed arrival, for tribal leaders alongside Gara's overall coordination working through final, comprehensive defensive preparation. Whatever comes tomorrow, Gara said, addressing this assembled leadership with her characteristic, weighted authority, we face it as genuine coalition, for tribes united through choice rather than simple convenient necessity. Karsgard represents considerably more than simple defensive fortress. It represents proof that our people can build something beyond scattered, vulnerable wandering if we choose genuine cooperation over traditional, isolated independence. Grask, whose own Ironback clan had become genuine, integrated partner across the preceding months, offered formal acknowledgement carrying specific, considerable weight. I doubted this project's fundamental premise, doubted Kale's particular presence within what I initially assumed should remain purely Orc leadership. I no longer carry that doubt. Whatever comes tomorrow, we face it together as genuine, unified people rather than simply convenient, temporary alliance. I processed this collective conviction with specific, considerable emotion beneath continued, mounting anxiety regarding tomorrow's confirmed, staggering confrontation 15,000 soldiers under Vane's coordinated command against our own, considerably smaller but genuinely unified coalition of 1,240 warriors, fighting not simply for individual survival, but but for proof that everything Skarsgård represented could actually, genuinely endure against whatever comprehensive elimination Kane's political ambition had authorized. Skara, her injured arm still carrying permanent limitation, but her tactical wisdom no less valuable for that physical constraint, offered final strategic consultation as this council concluded. Height advantage, coordinated defense, and whatever tactical creativity 15 years of demonstrated capability has taught us to deploy when facing superior numbers. We've overcome worse odds before, Kale. We can overcome these as well. Together, I said, processing the specific collaborative truth that this entire ambitious project had consistently required across every stage of its considerable, dangerous development. Together, Gara confirmed, her tone carrying specific, weighted finality as this crucial strategic council concluded. I spent that night's remaining hours in whatever final preparation continued urgency demanded, processing accumulated weight of everything 15 years had built genuine family, genuine belonging, genuine purpose that considerably exceeded whatever narrow, conditional existence my birth circumstances had originally offered. Whatever tomorrow's confrontation actually produced, I understood, watching Skarsgård's considerable population complete final defensive preparation beneath gathering darkness, that we faced at having built something genuinely, comprehensively worth defending, not simple fortress walls, but authentic community that 15 years of accumulated sacrifice and demonstrated character had gradually, thoroughly earned. The storm Kane's political ambition had gathered would arrive with dawn's first light. Whatever its actual outcome, I intended to face it as exactly what 15 years had genuinely made me. Not human traitor, not or pretender, but authentically, comprehensively Ashwolf, fighting for family that had chosen me as thoroughly as I'd chosen them. The gathering storm approached. Skarsgård and everyone it sheltered prepared to meet it. Vane's forces arrived with dawn's first light. Exactly as our intelligence networks had predicted, 15,000 soldiers arraying across the approach to Skarsgård with a specific, overwhelming visual scale that no amount of advance warning fully prepares you to witness directly. I stood atop Skarsgård's primary defensive wall, alongside Gara, Vrenna, Skara, and the assembled leadership of our four-tribe coalition, processing the staggering scale of Valemor's mobilized response with whatever composure 15 years of accumulated training had built into increasingly reliable discipline. Even against odds this genuinely daunting. They're bringing siege equipment, Skara observed, studying the distant formations with her characteristic tactical attention despite continued arm limitation. Trebuchets, at minimum 4 that I can identify from this distance. This isn't simple infantry assault. Va un temps compréhensive, méthodical destruction. General Vane himself, I could make out through careful observation, rode at his force's center, his bearing carrying the specific weight of a commander whose personal history had shaped 15 years of escalating campaign toward exactly this culminating confrontation. The battle began with sustained trebuchet bombardment that tested Skarsgård's defensive fortification against exactly the kind of comprehensive assault Skara's tactical assessment had predicted. Our carefully designed height advantage and reinforced structure absorbing considerable damage, while our own defenders maintained position rather than the immediate collapse Vane's forces apparently anticipated from what they'd likely assumed represented simple, primitive, Orc construction. The walls are holding, Gara reported, moving through our defensive positions with characteristic, weighted authority despite the battle's mounting intensity. Whatever Kane's intelligence suggested about our capability, they clearly didn't anticipate genuine, sophisticated fortification. The infantry assault that followed sustained bombardment tested our coalition's integrated tactical coordination against considerably superior numbers Ashwolf warriors fighting alongside Ironback clan, Stonehide, and Bloodmoon tribal warriors in coordination that months of careful, deliberate integration had gradually developed into genuine, functional unity despite our diverse tribal traditions' initial considerable differences. I fought at a critical defensive point alongside Rukta. Our combined combat capability, her raw orc strength complementing my own precision and speed, finding genuine, effective purchase against Vane's coordinated but individually less experienced soldiers. The battle's crucial turning point arrived roughly 3 hours into sustained engagement, when Vane himself, apparently frustrated by his force's failure to achieve the swift, decisive breakthrough his staggering numerical advantage should theoretically have provided, personally led a concentrated assault directly toward Karsgard's primary gate. I recognized the strategic significance immediately. Vane's personal presence at this crucial point, representing both genuine tactical opportunity and considerable direct danger, given his own reported combat capability and 15 years of accumulated command experience. I need to reach that position, I told Gura, processing the tactical calculation with specific, urgent clarity. If Vane personally breaks through, the psychological impact on both our forces and his own soldiers' continued morale could prove decisive beyond simple, immediate tactical loss. Then go, Gara said, her tone carrying specific, weighted authorization. Take whatever support you require. I moved toward the primary gate's defensive position alongside Rukta and several other capable warriors, arriving as Vane's concentrated assault began genuinely testing our gate's reinforced structure with a determination that confirmed his own personal, considerable investment in this crucial confrontation. Vane himself, upon witnessing my approach, called out with specific, unmistakable recognition. The human traitor. Kane's intelligence was accurate, genuinely here, genuinely fighting for these creatures rather than your own people. These are my people, I called back, meeting his hostile attention with a specific, resolved clarity that 15 years of accumulated conviction had gradually, thoroughly built. Whatever blood I was born with, whatever narrow definition your kingdom's propaganda insists upon, these orcs gave me genuine family when my actual birth parents sold me for drink money. That's not betrayal, General. That's simply choosing genuine belonging over whatever accident of birth initially, briefly claimed me. Sentiment, Vane said, his tone carrying specific, dismissive contempt beneath obvious, mounting battle exhaustion. These creatures killed my family 15 years ago. Whatever comfortable narrative you've constructed for yourself doesn't change what they fundamentally are. Some orcs killed your family, I said, working through careful, deliberate distinction despite the battle's continued, mounting chaos around us. Just as some humans sold their own children for drink money, or ordered the comprehensive slaughter of orc settlements whose only crime was existing within territory your kingdom claims exclusively. Neither side holds monopoly on cruelty, General. Neither side holds monopoly on genuine decency, either. Vane's expression carried specific, visible conflict beneath his continued, hostile, bearing 15 years of accumulated personal grief, apparently wrestling against whatever uncomfortable complexity my direct challenge genuinely represented. This conversation changes nothing about today's necessary outcome, he said, finally, his combat stance shifting toward direct, personal engagement. Karsgard represents unprecedented threat that Valemore cannot permit to continue existing. Whatever personal philosophy you've constructed, that strategic reality remains unchanged. The direct combat that followed tested every accumulated skill 15 years of Skara and Nashka's patient, demanding instruction had gradually developed against Vane's own considerable, battle-hardened capability and engagement whose outcome, given his 15 years of command experience against my own more limited personal combat history, remained genuinely, dangerously uncertain. I fought with whatever combination of speed and precision my particular physical limitations had taught me to compensate through. Vane's own considerable strength and experience finding genuine, concerning purchase against my defensive positioning despite considerable, sustained effort. The engagement's crucial moment arrived when Vane, pressing what appeared genuine, decisive advantage, found himself instead confronting the specific tactical creativity that 15 years of adapting orc combat tradition to my particular human limitations had gradually, thoroughly developed a maneuver that exploited exactly the kind of precise, patient technique his own more straightforward combat approach hadn't specifically anticipated countering. I disarmed him through this crucial opening, my blade finding position against his exposed throat with the specific, decisive advantage that considerable accumulated skill had finally, genuinely produced. Vane froze, processing his sudden, complete vulnerability with visible, genuine shock. Finish it, then. Whatever satisfaction killing me provides your adopted people's continued cause. I processed this moment with specific, careful consideration beyond simple, immediate tactical advantage, recognizing implications that extended considerably beyond this single, decisive confrontation. No, I said, finally, lowering my blade despite obvious, continued tactical opportunity. I've spent 15 years learning that unnecessary killing doesn't actually serve whatever genuine cause it claims to represent. You lost your family to needless violence. I won't add more needless violence to whatever cycle already exists between our peoples. Vane stared at me with specific, visible confusion beneath continued, considerable shock. You're offering mercy. After everything my forces have done, everything I've personally authorized against your adopted people, I'm offering proof, I said, meeting his confused attention with specific, deliberate clarity, that whatever Kane's propaganda claims about monsters requiring elimination, genuine mercy and genuine strength aren't mutually exclusive. That's not weakness, General. That's the actual, considerable difference between the cycle of violence that's shaped 15 years of your personal grief and whatever genuine alternative might actually prove possible. The specific, unexpected mercy of this moment witnessed by soldiers on both sides who'd paused their own continued engagement to observe this crucial, decisive confrontation produced effect considerably beyond simple, immediate tactical outcome. Vane's own soldiers, witnessing their commander's defeat and subsequent, unexpected survival, began genuine, visible hesitation regarding continued engagement. The specific psychological impact of witnessing an Orcs traitor demonstrate exactly the kind of restraint and mercy that Kane's dehumanizing propaganda had insisted was fundamentally impossible from anyone genuinely allied with Orc society. Vane himself, processing this unexpected mercy with visible, considerable internal conflict, called out to his own forces with specific, uncertain authority. Stand down. Whatever this fortress actually represents, today's continued assault accomplishes nothing beyond additional, unnecessary casualties on both sides. The battle's momentum shifted decisively through this crucial development, Vane's forces gradually disengaging from continued assault, our own coalition maintaining defensive position rather than pursuing costly, unnecessary counterattack against a retreating force whose own commander had apparently reconsidered whatever comprehensive elimination Kane's political ambition had originally authorized. The aftermath, processed over subsequent days as both sides assessed the battle's genuine, considerable cost, produced consequences that extended considerably beyond simple, immediate military resolution. Vane's own account of our confrontation, delivered through official channels back to Valemor's court, apparently included details regarding my demonstrated mercy that complicated Kane's continued propaganda considerably. The specific, undeniable fact the human traitor had shown restraint and genuine principle that Kane's dehumanizing narrative had insisted Orc-elite humans couldn't possibly possess. Kane's political position has weakened considerably, Vrenna reported, roughly 2 weeks after the battle's conclusion, relaying information gathered through our continued intelligence networks. Vane's own account, combined with broader public skepticism regarding whether comprehensive final resolution actually served Valemor's genuine interests versus simple, personal political ambition, has produced considerable court reconsideration. The formal resolution that eventually emerged, negotiated over subsequent months through careful, deliberate diplomacy that Vane himself, in a development I hadn't fully anticipated, apparently helped facilitate, established something considerably short of genuine. Comprehensive peace, but genuine. Meaningful ceasefire. Valemor's court formally acknowledging Skarsgård's continued existence in exchange for our coalition's own formal commitment toward exactly the restrained, principled conduct I'd demonstrated during that crucial, decisive confrontation. This isn't perfect resolution, Gara observed, during the formal ceremony that marked this negotiated ceasefire's establishment, addressing Skarsgård's assembled population with her characteristic, weighted authority. Valemor's court hasn't suddenly decided orcs deserve equal consideration alongside human interests, but it represents genuine, considerable progress beyond simple, endless cycle of mutual elimination that's defined our people's relationship for longer than anyone currently living can properly remember. I stood among Skarsgård's assembled population during this historic proceeding. Vrena, Skara, Nashka, Rukta, Grask, and the other tribal leaders whose coalition had genuinely, thoroughly succeeded beyond whatever initial, uncertain hope had first inspired this ambitious project, processing the specific, considerable weight of everything 15 years had gradually, comprehensively produced. I had arrived among these people as a frightened, discarded 10-year-old child, uncertain whether survival itself remained genuinely possible. I stood now as fully, unquestionably Ashwolf, having helped build genuine sanctuary that housed hundreds of orcs across 4 previously independent tribes, having personally demonstrated through crucial, decisive confrontation that genuine mercy and genuine strength weren't mutually exclusive qualities. Vrena approached during this reflective moment, her expression carrying specific, considerable emotion beneath her usual careful reserve. 15 years ago, I told you that you'd have something your birth parents never valued you enough to provide. A place that's actually genuinely yours. You did. I acknowledged, processing the specific, accumulated weight of everything those 15 years had gradually, comprehensively built. Look at what you've actually built from that beginning, she said, gesturing toward Skarsgård's considerable population, toward the formal ceasefire ceremony marking genuine, if incomplete, progress toward peace between our peoples. Not simple personal survival. Genuine, lasting change that considerably exceeds whatever modest hope I carried that first evening, watching a frightened human child decide to trust orc strangers rather than simply running toward whatever uncertain alternative remained. I processed her words with specific, overwhelming emotion that 15 years of accumulated experience hadn't fully prepared me to properly manage the particular weight of watching abstract, desperate hope from that first terrible day gradually, comprehensively transform into genuine, lasting achievement. Rukta joined this reflective moment, her own expression carrying specific, genuine satisfaction beneath obvious, continued battle exhaustion. Remember what I told you all those years ago? That it wouldn't matter you started human if you actually became Ashwolf properly? I remember I said, meeting her attention with specific, considerable warmth, that 15 years of genuine friendship had gradually, thoroughly developed. You'd have become that, Kale. Genuinely, comprehensively. And you've built something today that proves it beyond whatever doubt anyone, human or orc, might have previously carried. I looked across Skarsgård's assembled population, across the fortress that 15 years of accumulated sacrifice and demonstrated character had gradually, comprehensively built, and I processed the specific, considerable understanding that whatever came next and continued, careful navigation of this negotiated ceasefire's genuine, if incomplete, progress. I faced it having already achieved something considerably beyond simple personal survival. I had built, alongside genuine family who'd chosen me as thoroughly as I'd chosen them, proof that the rigid boundary between human and orc, between civilized and monster, was never actually as permanent or necessary as generations of mutual conflict had previously insisted. The gathering storm that had threatened Skarsgård destruction had instead produced something considerably more significant than simple survival genuine, demonstrated proof that mercy and strength, human origin and orc belonging, could coexist within a single person's genuine, comprehensive character. Whatever challenges continued peace between our peoples would inevitably require navigating, I understood, standing among family that 15 years had genuinely, thoroughly earned, that Skarsgård and everything it represented about possibility beyond generations of assumed, inevitable hostility would continue standing. Not through simple, comfortable hope alone, but through the patient, difficult, genuinely earned work of 15 years accumulated sacrifice, demonstrated character, and the specific, considerable courage required to choose mercy even when vengeance remained genuinely, tactically available. I was Kale of the Ashwolf Sisterhood, human-born, orc-raised, genuinely, comprehensively belonging to family that had chosen me as thoroughly as I'd chosen them. In Skarsgård, the fortress we'd built from stone and blood and 15 years of patient, difficult effort, stood as lasting proof that genuine unity remained possible, even across whatever boundary generations of assumed hostility had once insisted could never genuinely be crossed.